At 3 in the morning, my phone rang. I answered, groggy, and my dad's voice sliced through the darkness. Your apartment's on fire. And you know what I did? I laughed. Because by then, the flames were the least of my worries. Growing up in San Diego, I thought my life was as ordinary as the rows of palm trees lining our street. My name's Daniel, and until recently, I believed in the version of family that sitcoms sell you. Parents who argue sometimes but always hug it out, a home that feels safe, and the idea that if you do your best, people will notice. Mom, Elena, loved making pancakes on Sundays, flipping them high in the air to make Mason and me laugh. Dad, Victor, coached my little league games, shouting encouragement from the dugout whether I hit a homer or struck out. And Mason, well, he was my older brother, 2 years ahead of me, always the golden one, the benchmark I could never quite reach. On the surface, everything seemed fine. We had family movie nights, birthday cakes with too many candles, and road trips up the coast. Teachers told my parents I was polite, hardworking, a good kid. By all accounts, I should have felt secure, anchored. But if you looked closer, the cracks were already there. Mason's trophies lined the shelves in our living room, soccer medals, debate awards, certificates for outstanding achievement. When relatives visited, Dad would beam, saying, "Mason's going places." Then, almost as an afterthought, he'd add, "Daniel's doing okay too." I told myself it didn't matter. Not everyone can be a prodigy. I had my own passions, sketching, late-night doodles that filled entire notebooks, dreams of one day designing something that mattered. Mom would smile distractedly at my drawings, but Dad dismissed them as a hobby. Still, I convinced myself I was happy. I had a part-time job at a coffee shop downtown, saving money for college. I was renting a small but cozy apartment with peeling paint and a view of the bay if you craned your neck far enough. To me, it felt like freedom. Independence. Every Saturday, I'd invite Mason over, trying to keep our bond alive. We'd grab burgers, talk about his internships, and I'd tell him about the customers at the cafe who tipped with poems or sketches. Mason always nodded politely but never really listened. The truth is, I ignored the subtle warning signs. The times Mom's tone would sharpen when I mentioned struggling with tuition. The way Dad's eyes glazed over when I spoke about my art projects. The sighs, the dismissive "we'll see," whenever I asked for advice. But I brushed it all off. I told myself, they love me. They just show it differently. And in those quiet evenings at my apartment, sketching by the glow of a cheap desk lamp, I felt a fragile kind of peace. That was my false stability, the illusion that everything was fine, that my family had my back, that I could balance their expectations with my own dreams. I didn't realize how quickly that fragile balance could shatter. Because soon, I discovered just how far my parents would go to protect Mason, even if it meant burning my life to the ground. The first warning bell came softly, almost disguised as a joke. It was the kind of moment most people would shrug off, but looking back, it was the first domino in a long, ugly chain reaction. It happened at a family dinner. Mason had just landed an internship with a prestigious tech company, and my parents couldn't stop gushing. "Our future CEO," Dad boasted, raising his glass. Mom clasped Mason's hand, beaming like she was sitting in the audience of his coronation. Then Dad turned to me. "And Daniel," he paused, smirking. "Well, at least he makes a mean latte." The table erupted in laughter, everyone except me. I forced a smile, stabbing at my food, telling myself not to make it awkward. But the words stuck like splinters in my chest. Later, in the kitchen, I overheard Mom's hushed voice. "Victor, be careful. Daniel's sensitive." Dad snorted. "He'll toughen up. Maybe it'll push him to actually do something with his life." I remember gripping the counter, my knuckles white. It wasn't just a careless joke. It was a glimpse into how they really saw me, not as their son with dreams and effort, but as the runner-up, the afterthought. Things escalated when Mason visited my apartment for the first time. I'd been proud to show him the space I worked so hard for, the thrifted furniture, the sketches pinned to my walls, the tiny balcony with fairy lights I strung up myself. But Mason barely looked around before wrinkling his nose. "It's cozy," he said carefully, his voice dripping with polite pity. Then he spotted the stack of sketchbooks on my desk. He flipped through them, chuckling. "You still doodle? Cute. But, this isn't really a career, right?" I wanted to scream at him, but instead I laughed weakly. "Yeah, I know. Just a hobby." But inside, I felt my world tilt. My art wasn't just a hobby. It was my voice, my escape, the thing that kept me sane. Hearing him dismiss it so easily, and knowing my parents agreed, made me feel small, like a child clutching crayons in a world that only respected diplomas and paychecks. The real breaking moment came a few weeks later. I was working a late shift at the cafe when Mason showed up with Dad. They sat at a corner table, talking in hushed tones. When I brought over their drinks, I caught enough of their conversation to freeze me mid-step. "Daniel doesn't need much," Dad was saying. "He's fine with scraps. But Mason, you've got potential. We'll make sure you have everything you need." Mason nodded, his expression serious, almost businesslike. "Thanks, Dad. I'll make you proud." Neither of them noticed me standing there, tray in hand, my ears burning. That night, as I walked home under the flickering streetlights, I couldn't shake the thought. I'm not their son. I'm their backup plan. Their safety net. The one who gets whatever's left after Mason's taken his share. I tried to tell myself it wasn't true, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew. The first warning bell had sounded. And the silence that followed was deafening. After that night at the cafe, the distance between me and my family stretched wider, but instead of filling it with silence, they filled it with pressure. Every conversation, every phone call, every dinner somehow circled back to the same theme. Mason's future mattered. Mine, not so much. At first, it was subtle. Mom would call and ask, "Daniel, can you cover Mason's share of the phone bill this month? He's got so much on his plate with the internship." Or Dad would casually mention, "Why don't you let Mason use your car? His company's downtown, and yours is just a coffee shop a few blocks away." I agreed, telling myself it was temporary, that Mason needed support now and things would even out later. But later never came. Soon, the requests weren't requests anymore. They were demands. "Daniel," Mom snapped one evening, "your brother shouldn't be worrying about groceries while he's changing the world. Just pick up the tab. You're single, you don't have kids. You can afford it." When I pushed back, Dad's voice hardened. "Stop being selfish. Everything we're doing is for the family. You want Mason to succeed, don't you?" The irony stung. I wanted Mason to succeed, but apparently, my own survival wasn't part of their definition of family. Things at my apartment shifted, too. Mason started dropping by unannounced, sometimes staying overnight. At first, he'd crash on the couch after late work meetings. Then his toothbrush appeared in my bathroom. A week later, he had a drawer in my dresser. When I brought it up, Mason shrugged. "It's just until I find a place closer to work." But weeks turned into months, and suddenly, my one-bedroom sanctuary felt invaded. His clothes littered the floor, his friends used my kitchen like it was theirs, and my sketchbooks disappeared under piles of Mason's paperwork. The worst part wasn't the mess. It was the way Mason made me feel like a guest in my own home. He'd answer the door when my landlord knocked. He'd reorganize my shelves, claiming it was more efficient. He even started referring to the apartment as our place. Whenever I protested, Mason laughed it off. "Relax, Danny. You're so uptight. We're brothers. What's yours is mine." But I didn't laugh. I couldn't, because every day I felt more invisible. Friends noticed the change too. I stopped inviting them over because Mason was always there, dominating the space. When I tried meeting them out, he'd text, demanding I come home early because he needed the apartment to prep for a meeting. Slowly, the invitations stopped coming, and I found myself drifting into isolation. One night, after a long shift at the cafe, I returned home to find Mason hosting a group of coworkers in my living room. They were eating takeout on my couch, drinking beer from my fridge, and one of them had even borrowed my laptop without asking. Mason looked up, grinning like he owned the place. "Hey, Danny. Hope you don't mind. We needed a spot to brainstorm." I wanted to scream, but instead I went to my room and shut the door, pressing my back against it as laughter spilled through the walls. That was the night I realized, this wasn't my home anymore. It was Mason's playground, and I was just tolerated in it. The final straw came when I checked my bank account one morning. Hundreds of dollars were missing. Rent money. I scrolled through the transactions and felt my stomach drop. Uber rides, restaurant tabs, even a payment to an electronics store. All under my account. When I confronted Mason, he didn't even deny it. He just smirked. "You'll get it back. Chill. You're making money, right? It's not like you're starving." I wanted to throw him out that second, but when I called Mom, hoping for backup, she sighed. "Daniel, don't be dramatic. Mason needs support right now. He's under pressure. Why can't you just help instead of complaining all the time?" That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't just being overlooked. I was being used. My home, my money, my peace, all siphoned away under the excuse of family. And the more I resisted, the more isolated I became. My friends were distant, my parents were against me, and Mason had effectively taken over my life. I used to think my apartment was my sanctuary, my little escape from their favoritism. Now, it felt like a cage, one they had all locked me inside. The night everything crystallized started out ordinary enough. I was working the closing shift at the cafe, mopping floors under the hum of the espresso machine, when my phone buzzed. A message from my landlord lit up the screen. "Daniel, we need to discuss your rent. You're 3 weeks behind. If I don't hear from you soon, I'll have to start eviction proceedings." I froze, the mop slipping from my hands. 3 weeks behind? That couldn't be right. I never missed rent. I budgeted everything down to the cent. I'd even been cutting back on groceries, eating ramen most nights just to make sure I stayed ahead. My stomach twisted as I logged into my bank account. The numbers confirmed my worst fear. Entire chunks of rent money were gone. Not just a few hundred thousands. Transactions I didn't recognize piled up. Designer sneakers, high-end restaurants, an online order for a watch worth more than my car. Mason. When I got home, he was sprawled on my couch, scrolling his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. Shopping bags sat on the floor beside him, receipts spilling out. "Where's my rent money?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He barely glanced up. "Relax. I borrowed it. I'll pay you back when I get my bonus." "Bonus? You're an intern, Mason. You don't get bonuses." He smirked. "Then call it an investment. You'll thank me when I'm rich." I couldn't breathe. My entire world tilted as the truth hit me. Mason hadn't just been freeloading. He was bleeding me dry, and my parents had let it happen. I stormed into my room, desperate to think, and that's when I noticed something even worse. My sketchbooks, years of drawings, ideas, pieces of myself, were gone. My shelves were bare. I tore through the apartment, searching, until I found them stuffed into a box in Mason's room. But when I opened it, my chest caved. Half of them were missing. "Mason, where are my books?" I shouted, holding the box like it was a coffin. He strolled in, unfazed. "Oh, those. Don't worry. I sold a few." "You what?" "They were just doodles, Danny. Some of the guys at work thought they looked cool, so I figured, why not? Better than them collecting dust. Besides, I used the money for something useful." Something in me snapped. Those weren't just doodles. They were mine. My work, my future. But Mason just shrugged. "You'll make more." For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my brother, not as the golden child, but as someone who saw me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. That night, I called my parents, shaking with anger. I laid it all out, the stolen money, the sold sketchbooks, the landlord threatening eviction. But instead of outrage, Mom sighed heavily. "Daniel, you're overreacting. Mason's under pressure. He needs support right now. Why can't you just let this go?" Dad's voice was sharper. "You should be proud your brother sees value in your drawings. Maybe now they'll actually serve a purpose." I hung up, my ears ringing. They didn't care. They never cared. Hours later, unable to sleep, I sat on my balcony, staring at the city lights. That's when my neighbor Claire, a paralegal who often studied late, noticed me. She stepped over, concern etched on her face. "You look like hell," she said gently. The words spilled out of me, everything. Mason stealing my money, selling my art, my parents dismissing it all. She listened quietly, then leaned back, eyes sharp. "Daniel, that's fraud. Theft. If you have proof, you can fight this. You don't have to just take it." Her certainty rattled me. I'd spent so long thinking I had no choice, that family was a shield for their behavior. But what if it wasn't? What if I had power they didn't expect me to use? Claire offered to help me organize the evidence, bank statements, receipts, even texts Mason had sent bragging about his purchases. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost. Hope. The revelation wasn't just that Mason had stolen from me. It was that my parents had chosen him over me so completely, they were willing to let my life collapse to prop us up. And now I had a choice: stay their scapegoat or fight back. Once Claire planted the idea in my head that I could actually fight back, it was like a switch flipped. For months, I had been living in reaction mode, scrambling to patch the holes Mason tore in my life. But now I started thinking strategically. If Mason and my parents saw me only as a pawn, then it was time to stop playing their game and start my own. The first step was gathering everything. Claire came over that weekend with a stack of folders and her laptop. We spread my bank statements across the kitchen table, highlighting every suspicious transaction. Uber rides at 2 a.m., luxury restaurants, electronics purchases, all things Mason couldn't afford, all charged to my account. Get screenshots of the texts too, Claire said, her tone brisk, professional. Anything where he admits borrowing or buying with your money. The more direct, the better. I scrolled through my phone, pulling up conversations that made my stomach churn. Mason casually bragging about splurging on new kicks, thanking me for covering him, even mocking me for being the responsible one. Every word, every emoji was a nail in his coffin. Next, we catalogued the missing sketchbooks. I thought I could never prove they were mine, but Claire showed me otherwise. You have photos of yourself drawing, right? Any old scans? Dates on your files? I did. My cloud storage was full of dated uploads, some even with me in frame. We matched those against Mason's resale posts on a local art forum he'd used under a fake username. The proof was undeniable. He'd sold my work, and the timestamps lined up perfectly. As we built the case, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't just the quiet younger son cleaning up after Mason. I was Daniel, and I had evidence. But evidence alone wasn't enough. We needed impact. Claire connected me with her friend, Jordan, a freelance journalist who specialized in local corruption and family disputes. At first, I hesitated. Did I really want to air my family's dysfunction in public? But then I remembered Dad's words, "Be proud Mason saw value in your drawings," and Mom's sighing dismissal. They had already erased my side of the story. This was my chance to reclaim it. We arranged a meeting with Jordan at a quiet cafe across town. I laid everything out, the bank theft, the sold sketchbooks, the emotional manipulation. He listened intently, then said, "This isn't just theft. This is a pattern of financial and emotional abuse. People will relate to this, especially if you're willing to go on record." The thought terrified me, but as I looked at the growing pile of evidence on the table, I realized I already had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Mason was oblivious. He strutted around the apartment like a king, bragging about an upcoming networking event his company was hosting. "Biggest night of my career," he said, grinning. "Everyone who matters will be there." Even Dad pulled some strings to get investors to show up. That's when it hit me. The networking event wasn't just Mason's big moment. It was the perfect stage for exposure. Claire and Jordan agreed. "You don't need to ruin his career out of spite," Jordan said carefully. "But if you reveal the truth where people can't ignore it, your parents can't bury it, and Mason can't gaslight his way out of it." So, we planned. Claire helped me prep a legal complaint to file with the bank and local authorities. Jordan drafted an article, ready to publish the moment we gave the green light. And me. I collected every ounce of courage I had, ready to stand up for myself in public for the first time. The night before the event, I barely slept. My mind raced with what-ifs. What if Mason retaliated? What if my parents doubled down? What if I looked like the jealous little brother trying to tear him down? But then I remembered the eviction notice. The empty fridge. The missing sketchbooks. My parents' laughter when I begged them to take me seriously. No. This wasn't jealousy. This was justice. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the only decent blazer I owned. My reflection looked nervous, sure, but also determined. Tomorrow, Mason would stand in front of his investors and colleagues, expecting praise and applause. Instead, he'd be confronted with the truth he'd tried so hard to bury. And for the first time in my life, I'd be the one holding the match. The evening of Mason's networking event arrived, and the air itself seemed charged with tension. The venue was a sleek downtown hotel ballroom, decked out in gold accents and white linens. Suits and cocktail dresses shimmered under the chandeliers, and Mason strutted among them like he already owned the room. I stood near the back with Claire and Jordan, my heart hammering against my ribs. My palms were sweaty, clutching the flash drive that held every piece of evidence. The stolen money trail, screenshots of texts, proof of the sold artwork. Claire squeezed my arm. "You've got this," she whispered. Mason spotted me across the room, his eyes narrowing. "Daniel," he said when he reached me, his voice a low hiss. "What are you doing here? I didn't invite you." "Relax," I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'm just here to support my brother." He smirked, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press. He was too busy basking in attention. Investors gathered around him, laughing at his jokes, impressed by his charm. Dad was there too, clapping Mason on the back, bragging loudly about his brilliant son. Mom hovered nearby, sipping champagne and smiling like she was the proud queen of the evening. As Mason stepped on stage to give his presentation, the room hushed. Screens lit up behind him, showcasing slides about innovation, growth, and visionary leadership. He spoke with confidence, his voice steady and rehearsed. For a moment, I almost doubted myself. Maybe I was just jealous. Maybe exposing him here would make me look bitter, pathetic. Then Claire nudged me. Jordan gave a subtle nod. And I remembered my landlord's eviction warning, my empty account, the box of stolen sketchbooks. No, this wasn't bitterness. This was survival. As Mason clicked to his final slide, "The future is here," Claire slipped the flash drive into the AV system. A beat of silence. Then the screen behind Mason flickered. Instead of the polished logo of his company, the projector displayed screenshots. Texts of Mason mocking me, bank statements with his charges, listings where my drawings had been sold under his fake profile. Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Mason froze, his confident smile collapsing into panic. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, spinning toward the tech crew. But the images kept rolling, one after another, undeniable. The final frame was a side-by-side comparison, a photo of me sketching years ago, time-stamped, next to a screenshot of Mason's online listing selling the exact same drawing. The room went dead silent. Then Jordan, who had been live-streaming discreetly from the back, hit publish on his article. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the crowd as the story spread. Dad stormed toward me, his face red. "Daniel, what have you done?" I stood tall, though my knees shook. I told the truth. "Do you have any idea what you've ruined?" Mom shrieked, grabbing Mason's arm as if shielding him. But it was too late. Several investors were already walking out, shaking their heads. Others whispered to each other, pointing at Mason like he was contagious. One woman, a major sponsor, turned to my parents and said coldly, "If this is how your family does business, I want no part of it." Security stepped in when Mason tried to lunge at me, his face twisted in rage. "You jealous little," he spat, but they held him back. Claire placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Daniel." But it wasn't just over. It was justice, playing out in real time. Minutes later, uniformed officers arrived, tipped off by the evidence Claire had already filed with the police. They escorted Mason out in handcuffs while the crowd filmed on their phones. Dad shouted, trying to stop them, but an officer cut him off. "Sir, we have proof of fraud and theft. Step aside." For the first time in my life, I watched the golden boy crumble. Mason's charm, his arrogance, his fake smile, all stripped away as he was shoved into the back of a police car. My parents glared at me like I'd set fire to their world. Maybe I had. But they were the ones who lit the match by choosing Mason over me again and again. As the ballroom emptied, Claire whispered, "How do you feel?" I exhaled, my chest lighter than it had been in years. Like I finally matter. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The fallout was only beginning. The days after Mason's downfall felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. For so long, my story had been about survival, scraping by, swallowing insults, being the invisible son. Now, suddenly, I was the one holding the narrative. And the world was listening. Jordan's article exploded. Within 24 hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Headlines spun across local news, tech in turn exposed for stealing from brother. Family favoritism ends in fraud charges. Golden boy falls from grace. My phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from strangers, old friends, even customers from the cafe. Some offered sympathy, others shared their own family horror stories. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. But with the attention came fallout. Mason was charged with fraud and theft. His company terminated him immediately, releasing a statement about their zero-tolerance policy. The investors he had charmed vanished, leaving him with nothing but debt and humiliation. I learned through court documents that he'd maxed out credit cards, taken out secret loans, and funneled everything through my accounts when he could. Without my money, he would have collapsed months earlier. My parents, though, were another story. They refused to accept reality. Mom called me, her voice icy, saying, "You've destroyed your brother's life. Are you proud of yourself?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "He did." Dad wasn't calmer. He showed up at my apartment one night, pounding on the door. "You ungrateful brat," he yelled. "We sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay us? By stabbing your own family in the back." I didn't open the door. I just listened, my heart pounding, until eventually his footsteps receded down the hall. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Claire stayed by my side through the storm. She helped me navigate the legal maze, and when the court ordered Mason to repay a portion of the stolen funds, she celebrated with me over cheap pizza and soda. "You did it, Daniel," she said. "You stood up for yourself." Still, it wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my life. I started sketching again, filling fresh notebooks with lines that poured out like confessions. This time, though, I didn't keep them hidden. With Claire's encouragement, I shared some online. To my shock, people responded, not with ridicule, but with admiration. Comments poured in, "This is incredible, your style is so unique, please open commissions." For the first time, my art wasn't just my secret, it was my future. The cafe manager, who had always quietly supported me, even offered to hang some of my pieces on the shop walls. Seeing strangers pause to admire them as they sipped their coffee made me realize I had underestimated myself for years. As for Mason, the last I heard, he was living back at my parents' house, sulking in his old bedroom while waiting for trial. They still treated him like their golden boy, cooking his meals, paying his legal fees, pretending the scandal was just a misunderstanding. But I didn't care anymore. That wasn't my burden to carry, because I had my own path now. I upgraded my apartment, nothing extravagant, just a slightly bigger place where I could set up a small art studio. I picked out second-hand easels, stocked up on supplies, and strung up fairy lights across the walls. It wasn't Mason's sleek tech office, but it was mine. Every brushstroke, every sketch reminded me I had survived. I had reclaimed what was stolen. One evening, I sat on the balcony with Claire, watching the city glow. Noah, my landlord's golden retriever, padded over from next door and rested his head on my lap. Claire smiled. "You know," she said softly, "most people would have folded. You didn't." I looked out at the skyline, the hum of traffic below. For so long, I thought strength meant carrying everyone else's weight, bending until I broke. But real strength was standing tall, even when the people closest to me tried to tear me down. "I used to think I was the spare son," I admitted. "The one who didn't matter. But now, I know better." I reached for my sketchbook, flipping to a fresh page. The blank space no longer scared me. It felt like possibility. My family had tried to erase me, to make me small. Mason had tried to drain me dry. But here I was, standing, drawing, dreaming. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living.